Good afternoon. If I could just go ahead and welcome you all here. My name is Troy Stangerone. I'm the Senior Director for Congressional Affairs and Trade here at KEI. I think we have a very interesting presentation today, and a lot of people talk about timeliness. I'm not going to sit here and give some trite statement, but it is interesting, I think, that the head of the OECD was actually just in South Korea, and in somewhat unusual fashion, he actually specifically pointed out that the need of labor reform in South Korea to take and promote economic growth. So I think, while perhaps not timely, this is a well-positioned and an important paper and a key topic for us to discuss today. And with that, we're very happy to have Dr. Vladimir Hlasny here. Sorry, I told you I would do that. Apologies. He's an associate professor at Ewha Women's University in Seoul, and he's published studies on the causes and consequences of regulatory reform in utility industries, environmental regulation and trade, pricing in online markets, and equal opportunity laws in labor markets. He serves as a research fellow with the as a research fellow with the Erasmus Mandus Public Policy Program, the International Center for Economic Research, and the Japan Foundation, prior to joining Ewha in 2007. He has a BA in economics from Lyon College and his PhD in economics from Michigan State University. With that, Dr. Hlasny.
Hello, thank you very much for coming for this talk, and I'm sorry that I didn't bring my voice with me. You can see that I'm completely taken by this topic, and I hope that by the end of this presentation you'll also be speechless, like me. So thank you, Troy, for the nice presentation, for introducing me. I guess the font is pretty small, but I'll try to read what's on the slides so that and discuss what's on the slides, so you don't have to do too much reading. So the short paper that I wrote and what I will be presenting today is about the rigidities in labor relations and the structural problems and kind of fault lines in the Korean labor market that create social inequality and that create problems with fairness and as well as efficiency of how the labor market in Korea operates. And I will focus on specifically on the role of legal, economic, and social policies at causing these problems and at hopefully remedying these problems in the future. So, oops. Here we go. Okay. So, given that the current organization of the Korean labor market exhibits a number of rigidities in labor relations and systematic structural faults, because of which the labor market is fragmented and individual segments of the labor market don't interact with each other flexibly and firms and workers cannot move freely to find their best use in the labor market. And given that these problems lead to undesirable outcomes for all participants of labor markets, for workers, companies, and the society at large, the questions that I will be addressing here are: what types of rigidities in labor relations are there? What kinds of structural faults exist in the labor market? What causes them? And as I said, I will be focusing on the determinants that have to do with public policy rather than other technical issues that cannot be easily resolved. What are the consequences for fairness and for efficiency in how the labor market operates? And since I will be focusing on public policy, I will talk a little bit about what is the current public policy trying to address these problems, and how could the present public policy be reformed so that the labor market could transition to a more flexible, more transparent, more equitable, and sustainable form of the market organization. And I will talk about, we can say, 4 or 5 major fault lines that, because of which the labor market is fragmented, and the firms and workers in individual segments cannot flow easily among the market segments. One fault line is between companies. So we can say that there is an uneven playing field between the large investor-owned conglomerates, Chaebol, and small and medium-sized enterprises, sometimes called middle-standing enterprises and small enterprises. I will talk about the fault line between types of workers. I will distinguish regular, meaning permanent, indefinite term workers versus non-regular workers, who comprise fixed term, temporary, part-time workers. 3, I will talk about the mismatch between workers and jobs due to unresolved uncertainty over workers' skills. So here I can just point out that, of course, in any market, there are different sources of uncertainty. So we could talk about uncertainty about workers, uncertainty about firms, how they will perform in the future, uncertainty about regulation. And regulatory uncertainty should be also mentioned as an important factor, given that Korean president is elected every 5 years. So there's uncertainty what the regulatory climate will be 5 years down the line, and local government officials and National Assembly members are re-elected every 4 years. So in this kind of intermediate term or long term, there is a very significant regulatory uncertainty. But here I'm focusing on the short term, day-to-day uncertainty in how firms operate, and that's why I focus on this uncertainty about workers' types, which has consequences for how firms recruit workers, and how workers make decisions about their skill acquisition and their plans for their careers. Next, the 4th important fault line is that there are uneven opportunities for skill acquisition between privileged versus disadvantaged workers. So here I will talk a little bit about the cost of obtaining formal education and the cost of getting retrained throughout their lives, and the public policy problems that create inequality opportunities, that don't allow disadvantaged workers to invest efficiently in their skills, and don't allow disadvantaged workers to be well matched with jobs, given their true underlying skills. And finally, we could talk about, I don't talk about the fifth factor in the paper, because the paper was already long and I ran out of space, but we could also talk about cultural factors which prevent workers, firms, and regulators to interact efficiently and to match workers with the jobs very efficiently. So I will focus on the first four types of problems, because all of them are economic or industrial problems which can be addressed by economic or industrial policy or legal reforms, whereas the last cultural or the social norm problem would be more addressed, would have to be addressed by some social policy intervention, public education, and so on. Slightly different type of problem. And because I come from Iwa Women's University, whose symbol is a nice cherry tree blossom, I've decided to create this nice graphic showing the five problems as the petals of a cherry tree blossom, and the message on this slide is that if the wind of change comes, so if the wind of policy reforms and of time will hopefully tear individual petals of this blossom, and eventually we'll end up with a tree full of shiny fruit rather than just green-white blossoms. Okay. So the first fault line that I discuss in the paper is the difference between large firms and small firms, and what I'm writing here is a simplification. Of course, in Korea there are all kinds of firms, and by grouping firms into just two categories, saying that there are these too large to fail, large investor-owned firms, typically manufacturing firms, and firms with a government stake in them. And on the other hand, saying that the rest of firms are small, medium-sized enterprises, which are typically service firms and are typically subcontractors to the Chaebol. So there is some simplification here. But I would say that cutting all firms, grouping all firms into these two categories gets us far enough in understanding the overall structure of the Korean labor market, of the Korean industry, and so it's a useful way to distinguish firms. So on the one hand, we can say that the privileged, large, successful firms have access to best public tenders and tenders from abroad. They have good access to cheap financing, support for research and development. But we can say that these firms produce cutting-edge products. They need research and development to stay ahead of their competitors. So they need creative, experienced workers. They have to train their workers to work with the productive technologies and with the capital. And so these firms rely on, there you go. These firms typically rely on regular workers, and because these firms operate under tight regulatory oversight and oversight by their stakeholders, such as their business partners abroad, their customers abroad, they have to confirm with labor standards, they have, with equal opportunity laws. And so the workers working for these companies typically earn decent monetary compensation, full benefits, and they have high job security. So workers at these companies are difficult to fire if they prove to be unproductive, let's say. On the other hand, small and medium-sized companies, who are typically service firms, who serve as subcontractors to the Chaebol, they rely much less on innovation. They don't have opportunities for expansion to other sectors, so they work in the same area for the same Chaebol firms, and they typically hire non-regular workers to save on labor costs. They pay monetary compensation, but they don't offer other benefits. And in order to keep their workforce on non-regular contracts, they cannot employ their workers for more than 2 years under the current labor standards. If a worker stays with the company for 2 years, company would have to switch the worker to a regular, much more expensive status. Currently, this period is being extended to 4 years. At the end of the talk, I might say something about whether this is a good idea, whether the recent policy proposals to change the distinction between regular workers and non-regular workers, whether they are likely to help with the inequality in the labor markets. Okay? So the last thing I can say is that smaller firms are regulated much more loosely. Labor standards and equal opportunity laws are monitored, are not enforced effectively, and so workers working for these companies are not. They face worse working conditions, and they don't receive all the protections from labor standards and equal opportunity laws that regular workers at larger firms receive. Okay. The last thing I can mention here is that in recent years, the government has started favoring small firms, supporting them financially to be competitive. These firms are typically not profitable. There's a high turnover. A large fraction of small firms run out of business. And so the government has been trying in recent years to support them. The government has tried to give them preferential treatment in access to public tenders, which is good, but in the process, the government has distorted some incentives of these firms. such as if small firms are eligible to receive preferential treatment, if they have to be under certain size, then they are discouraged from expanding. So the benefits that they receive currently from the government distorts the incentives for distorts the decisions in their operations. Okay, related. So I've talked a little bit already about regular versus non-regular workers. And just to say a little bit more about this distinction, so this distinction is given by current labor standards. Regular and non-regular workers are distinguished by the non-pay benefits they receive, by the social welfare net they face, and by the ease of termination. So non-regular workers have a much higher insecurity in their jobs. They know that they will, they can expect that they will be terminated within 2 years of being hired. There's a discrete wedge between the labor costs of the two groups. So, so hiring non-regular workers is much cheaper for firms, and that's why firms whose production processes don't require worker training will prefer to hire non-regular workers who are cheaper. And firms who are not regulated as well will also choose to hire cheaper workers. So we can summarize that the unregulated employers and employers who don't rely on workers' firm-specific skills and on work continuity can survive by hiring just non-regular workers. That means that these employers don't have incentives to invest in their workers' skills and don't support the workers' professional growth. Okay? As I said, regular, we can call them primary sector jobs, are more secure. They carry generous non-pay benefits and opportunities for professional advancement. They are well protected by labor standards from termination, and these workers are protected by equal opportunity laws from discrimination and poor treatment. Regular jobs, we can also say that they are scarce. So large firms offering regular jobs have much larger applicant pools from among to choose their workers, and they can choose to, and these firms can choose to hire only workers who have proved themselves as the most hardworking, most motivated, and most likely to be loyal. Which means that workers from disadvantaged backgrounds, childbearing age women who might go on maternity leave in the coming years, the disabled and the elderly are excluded from being hired for regular jobs. Youth workers without good social connections or good family backgrounds who could vouch for them have a hard time landing a regular job. So clearly, this distinction between regular jobs and non-regular jobs creates unfairness or inequality among workers in the labor market. And we could talk about unfairness here, but if we could have different standards about what is fair, and instead maybe we can just focus on the efficiency problems with this market setting. So one inefficiency due to this market setup is that the existing system reduces the incentives of disadvantaged workers for acquiring skills. If disadvantaged workers know that they have a low chance of getting hired for regular jobs, they will not invest in skills that are demanded by primary sector firms, and they will invest less in their skills, and they will maybe invest in wrong skills, not necessarily those that would maximize their productivity in the labor market. Another problem at all types of firms is that employers face uncertainty about the characteristics and productivity of the workers they hire. And if employers cannot overcome or hedge this risk. This problem is particularly strong among primary sector firms who hire for regular positions because there are larger stakes. Okay? If these primary sector firms have to hire workers who would be earning higher compensation, higher benefits, they will be harder to terminate if they don't prove to be productive enough. So they face a greater problem because of this uncertainty over worker skills. They cannot overcome the problem because there are some cultural and legal barriers that prevent them from hiring unproved or workers with uncertain skills. Let's say companies cannot negotiate working conditions, giving them, let's say, some trial period compensation, because the laws don't provide for that, and the way that companies and workers make employment contracts doesn't have a provision for negotiation and temporary contract stipulations. Okay, so so the one way that companies deal with the problem of uncertainty about their workers is they profile workers by their observable characteristics. So when workers apply for jobs, they're asked about their family backgrounds, the jobs and positions of their parents, maybe sometimes even salaries of their parents. Workers report all the certificates that they have earned, even if those certificates have nothing to do with the skills that the workers will need on the jobs. So workers report on their, let's say, certificates of proficiency with Microsoft Office, even though this kind of skill is not at the core of what companies will need from workers. So I will talk, at the end of this slide, I will talk a little bit more about this, how it affects workers' incentives for what skills or what characteristics to invest in. The other way that employers try to circumvent this problem is instead of hiring unproved workers into regular positions, they might outsource jobs to less regulated subcontractors who would hire the same workers as in a non-regular for non-regular status. And finally, if primary sector firms, if Chaebol cannot use illegal or discriminatory methods in recruiting workers, again, they will outsource the job to third-party headhunters who would do the recruitment for them. So there are these several methods that companies use to get around the problem of uncertainty of worker skills. And so just looking at this list, you might think that, well, it might be expensive to use these processes. So it might be expensive to collect and analyze information on users' characteristics to predict what the actual productive skills of the workers are. And it might be costly to use third-party companies, such as subcontractors or headhunters. So that's one source of inefficiency. Another inefficiency is that when workers who realize that their true productivity is unobservable, but their selected characteristics are observable, this will distort their incentives into how much skills they should invest in and what sorts of skills they should invest in. So instead of investing in true productivity, let's say instead of investing in skills to become creative, writing skills, computer programming skills, they will invest in skills that are observable during the hiring process, such as their looks, language proficiency, computer proficiency certificates, which may not be truly useful for employers. And that's true for all workers. So disadvantaged and privileged workers might invest in wrong skills, and which is costly to workers, and it doesn't improve their productivity. Workers with poor backgrounds might be completely discouraged from investing, realizing that they don't have the observable skills to be hired into regular jobs. They may not invest in any skills, regardless of their true underlying ability. So these are efficiency problems stemming from this uncertainty over worker skills. The fourth problem that we can mention with the labor market currently is that there is insufficient social welfare net and insufficient programs to help workers get trained in the first place and get retrained if they fall from the ideal career path. So on this slide, I list kind of what would an efficient public policy do. And we can say that a good public policy would ensure that workers receive a second chance in case of failure. So career interrupted women who return from maternity leaves, whose skills have become lost during the maternity period, currently don't have an opportunity to catch up with their cohort of workers. Same thing we can say about entrepreneurs. The owners of small and medium-sized companies who fail have a hard time opening up business again, and typically failed business owners end up working as non-regular workers in the following years. So one thing that a good public policy would do is provide opportunities to get retrained, so that people receive more than one chance in their lifetime. Okay, that's something that the paper goes much more into. That currently, for Korean workers, we could say that there is this career path. That young workers enter a particular career path if they come from good family backgrounds, they go to good schools, their families invest in their after-school tutoring programs. That leads to a good starting job, that leads to a good lifetime employment. If the workers fail anywhere in this path, they get dropped to the non-regular employment career path, and it's very difficult for them to return or transition up to a different career path. So we can say that because of this lack of opportunities for lack of second chances, there's this significant path dependency, or we can say dynamic complementarity between how successful people are during school, how successful they are during university, then during their first jobs, and in their later jobs in their career. We can also say another problem with current public policy is that the social welfare net is not sufficient. A better public policy would ensure that unemployed workers will not experience attrition of their skills, and underemployed workers who have not been matched to their best positions, who might be working part-time rather than full-time. Good public policy would help these people get retrained and transition to the best jobs fitting their underlying skills. At the same time, of course, the social welfare net would ensure that unemployed people will have high enough incentive to find jobs. So the welfare subsidies should not be high enough to discourage people from actually working. And that's something that current policy proposals deal with, that the unemployment benefits should not be too high, so that all workers will still have an incentive to join labor market. But the coverage of workers should be expanded so that all unemployed workers have access to some funds. Okay. Workers with constraints such as children or handicaps should receive support to be able to use their skills in the most fitting jobs. So currently, one big problem is a lack of access to childcare, and the current administration has already started expanding childcare programs, and more will be done in the coming years to give people incentives to not penalize people for having children, to encourage fertility, to encourage good balance between work life and private life, and to help parents with children to stay on the good career path. So social welfare net is presently inadequate, but current policy proposals and hopefully more policy proposals in the future will deal with these issues. Government industrial policy contributes to the problem. So as I've mentioned, by having this schism between primary sector firms and secondary sector firms and regular workers and non-regular workers, the policy discourages primary sector firms from hiring non-traditional and disadvantaged workers and workers with constraints. It discourages SMEs from investing in their workers' skills. So if some of the issues that we've discussed on the previous slides get corrected, that should help bring even private sector solutions to these problems. Okay.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah.
Do you happen to know, can you estimate the percentage of jobs in the formal job market versus the non-standard? And are you aware of trends in terms of where the job creation is? Is there, are they tracking that?
Yes. So yeah, that's tracked. I think it's just 1 second. So I think if I'm roughly half of jobs in Korea are regular jobs, half are non-regular jobs. I think the more exact numbers are in the paper. I think I mentioned it somewhere. So we're talking about large segments of the economy. In terms of and I think right now the situation kind of stagnates. That the number of non-regular jobs is high and stagnating. It's not improving, even as there are these policy reforms in play. They're not helping the situation yet. I'm trying to remember the numbers. That in absolute number, right. So in absolute number, the number of non-regular jobs remains high and even increasing, even as so after the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. More regular jobs were created. So as a percentage, the number of non-regular jobs has, I think, decreased slightly, but in terms of in absolute numbers, it hasn't fallen.
And there is a chart under the conclusion.
Right.
And so it looks like between 1995 and 2012, maybe the percentage of women in the regular jobs has doubled maybe, but it's still only at 40%. So that's a pretty big gap still.
Yeah.
And it looks like that the male and female daily, so that's like daily work, that's even less than temporary work, has been just the same.
So one thing through this discussion is that whether we are talking about large firms versus small firms, or regular jobs versus non-regular jobs, or men versus women, or manufacturing firms or service firms, we get a very similar picture. That it turns out that these large firms, because of the production processes that they rely on, and because of the regulation that they face, they end up hiring more regular workers. They also hire many more women than smaller firms. So a lot of these inequalities and these schisms apply regardless how we look at the labor market. Okay. I've probably run out of time. So
maybe if you got a few more slides, maybe like another 5 minutes or so.
I think this is maybe the last. I think the last point. I wanted to have one slide on education because there is this message that education is expensive. Education adds to this inequality between privileged versus disadvantaged workers. We could be talking about formal, we could be talking about preschool, early childhood education, or about formal education, or about lifelong vocational training. And we would see this message that the current system helps workers or students from privileged families and doesn't do enough for workers from disadvantaged backgrounds, and there's a lack of opportunities for lack of second chances and lack of opportunities for the disadvantaged workers to catch up in their skills with privileged workers. The last two ideas is that I've already talked a little bit about current policies and policy reforms that have been approved. We can say that Korea has a full set of labor standards, equal opportunity laws, anti-discrimination laws. There's a full set of institutions working on labor market issues. But some of these laws and institutions are more for show than really making a difference. So we can say that what the public policy currently lacks is in the intensive margin, that there is insufficient support or funding of all the initiatives, programs, legal provisions. If companies violate law, or if workers violate law, there are inadequate sanctions. Companies executives cannot be prosecuted criminally. If there are monetary sanctions, they're not adequate. So currently the laws don't deter wrongdoing by firms and workers sufficiently. Enforcement of laws is weak. There are exceptions. There's preferential treatment for some firms. So what is needed is more effective, systematic, universal enforcement without such exceptions. Okay. So the current gaps between the large privileged firms and small and medium-sized enterprises, between regular and non-regular workers, between workers from privileged backgrounds and disadvantaged workers, are currently kind of kept alive and promulgated by the current policy. And the public policy reforms should do much more to try to shrink these gaps. Here, this basically, I think maybe I have one last slide on public policy recommendations. Since I was talking about current policy, I just listed, I wanted to show kind of a list of the existing equal opportunity laws and labor standards that exist in Korea. And if we looked at this list carefully, we would find that all the necessary provisions are there that exist in other countries. Ministry of Employment and Labor has enacted a number of laws and continuously amends these laws. So many of these acts and laws have come into existence a long time ago, 20 or 30 years ago, and they're continuously amended even up to this year. National Assembly keeps approving amendments to various acts dealing with education policy and labor policy and industrial policy for large versus small firms. So this is a list of amendments approved this year by the National Assembly. And so, for example, on May 19th, the National Assembly went through almost 100 amendments, among which at least these 20 were related in some way to labor markets, education policy, and industrial policy. So, so there's a motion to do this, to improve this intensive, to improve the existing laws on the intensive margin. But still, much more needs to be done. So the last slide that I will show is just very broadly, policy recommendations are that the government should do more to promote level competition among all types of firms, large versus small firms. No preferential treatment, no preferential access to financing and public tenders. The government should ensure that all firms have correct incentives for growth and mobility. That small firms can easily grow into medium size or even large size, where currently there is essentially zero mobility. Small firms remain small or run out of business. Medium-sized firms stay medium-size. Workers also don't have mobility. If they are on the non-regular career path, they have it almost impossible to switch to regular employment career path. The government should try to promote transparency in the interaction between workers and firms. Like I mentioned on the previous slide, the government should focus on the intensive margin of the existing set of laws, industry regulations, by putting stronger funding and support for the existing programs, making provisions of laws and voluntary agreements more binding. So as in 2015, the government succeeded in getting an agreement together between business groups, labor groups, and government organizations to work together to resolve some of these structural problems in the labor market. But currently, the agreement is toothless. There's no timeline. Most provisions are voluntary. There is no way to track and enforce this agreement currently, or punish parties who lag behind in what they agreed to. Sanctions for wrongdoing should be increased, and enforcement should be more effective and even across all types of firms and all types of workers. The government, to the extent that there is limited budget that the government has, it could use available resources better by using not only federal but also local government resources and the resources that business groups and communities have. So let's say in terms of early childhood education and child care, those are programs that could be started at the level of communities. So there could be better interaction, better cooperation between the federal government and communities. Education, to the extent that there are that the cultural norms and business norms are not conducive to efficient interaction between workers and firms. The government could do better to educate employers and workers about their rights and responsibilities, to promote efficiency, fairness, and sustainability in the going norms. Okay. And one thing I can mention here is that, in particular, workers should be empowered to call for their rights, because currently in the negotiations between workers and firms, workers have face too big of workers are not empowered to stand up for their rights. They could they fear of losing their jobs, of being blacklisted in the industry of their choice, and so the government should give more voice, should empower workers to be able to protect their rights, and should empower human rights representatives to fight for workers' rights. Thank you very much. This brings me to the end of the presentation. Just at the end of the presentation, I copied the table from the end of my paper with the list of problems as I see them, the existing proposed policy of the government, and some recommendations for further action. But I think you have that in the paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hlasny. Before opening up to questions, I'd like to take the moderator's privilege and ask you a couple. One thing that sort of stands out to me, we've talked about, how the firms basically are somewhat inhibited in that they have very little information to go on, and they have sort of a high risk threshold in terms of hiring new employees because of the permanent nature of the structure. So my question, or the first one would be, is sort of, when we look at this issue in terms of, if you don't come from, you said a privileged background, but I mean, in some ways it's like if you don't come from one of the Sky schools, it becomes more difficult to take and get a job. Is there one, I guess, maybe almost on the market side, a market efficiency for one of the Chaebol to take and look at a school, maybe one that isn't a Sky school, go and try and work and develop a program with them that would meet its needs to try and develop the type of graduates it needs, and then tap into sort of untapped labor market, which may be as talented, or maybe in some cases more talented than those coming out of the Sky schools. And also, at the same time, is there maybe a need, or if this already exists, because I don't know, to have some type of structure in the university system to where the schools take and they bring in intentionally a certain amount, we'd call it a quota, and we do it, for different ethnic groups and things in the United States, maybe, but to, people from underprivileged backgrounds, so that way you can try and start shifting some of the societal structures in terms of the access to opportunities.
Yes, so there are some initiatives like that. So one policy proposal is to some of the educational opportunities that are currently missing, to make business groups responsible for providing them. So let's say to the extent that there is little childcare provided currently, to work with business groups, maybe to force large companies to open certified childcare centers to provide childcare to their workers. So there is some initiative for interaction between the government and companies. Then there's also new vocational programs are being started. I'm not sure if you have heard in the news about at Iowa Women's University there's currently or the problem maybe got resolved recently, but my university received funding to open a vocational, I think, what was the name of the program?
Education type program, I think it was it?
Lifelong university, something like that. Then there was some political problem where maybe the decision to open this kind of program wasn't communicated very well between administrators and students, and so it's not clear whether this program will go forward. But that's one initiative where the government put aside money to provide second chance to older students to get retrained. What else did I forget?
The idea of trying to get underprivileged students into the better schools by setting aside certain spaces.
Oh, I see. I'm not familiar with this. So I think there's already a system of scholarships. But I think currently this issue of uncertainty about worker skills is not resolved well. So still the large corporations prefer workers from the sky universities not because these universities provide superior skills, at least in my opinion, but one clear advantage of these schools is that education at the best universities provides a signal about motivation and the resources that workers' families have put up, and education at these best universities serves as a vouches for the commitment of workers to work hard, to not waste the investment of their families into the education.
Thank you. Just very briefly, if you will give your name and affiliation before I see your question. Yes, sir.
Yeah, please.
Oh, well, yeah.
I'm Nancy Donaldson, the director of the ILO Washington office. And thank you for your presentation and for your great recommendations, I think. I just wanted to ask about two things in the paper. I noticed from a endnote, that the Korean Public Employment Service, people in the government, it's only 5% of workers, is what it says. It was a footnote 46, and that typical employment services in other countries such as Germany, Japan, and UK and France are about 22 to 33%. Mm-hmm. So that's a very interesting statistic. I wonder if the culture of the government is not to create a labor inspection, a enforcement structure for their own laws that would be adequate to help propel forward some of the recommendations. Just one question. And the second thing I just want to say is in the end you talked about the tripartite agreement, which has some very good features for moving forward, but has not really proceeded, partly because the signatories seem to be in disagreement. So I'm just curious about whether, I would think if there was a strong revisiting of that by the tripartite, that might be a very good thing. There'd have to be motivation, but it seems that the subjects are good subjects.
Mm-hmm. So first, Now, the numbers in the footnote, I don't remember them off the top of my head. I would have to look at the paper. But you talked about enforcement of laws by the government, and I think that's this kind of cultural norm that the industry regulators try to promote harmony in employment relations. So if there's a conflict between workers and employers, the government doesn't force them to solve the dispute in any way. It just brings them to, it just brings the worker and employer to a table, and typically the employer will make the worker whole. So if there are explicit harms that the worker has experienced, the employer will have to compensate for those. But the employer, but there are no other consequences for wrongdoing. So executives cannot be imprisoned, and there are no punitive sanctions. So there's no compensation for implicit harms to workers, only kind of to make the worker kind of whole for the explicit harms done. And about the tripartite agreement, it's not dead, but it's kind of stagnating because of several issues. One is the disagreement among the parties. Some parties have stepped away. It's not clear whether it's permanent or whether they will be able to rejoin the negotiations. And maybe the bigger issue is that it's a voluntary agreement, and so it's not clear whether, even if the parties agree on something, whether they will follow through. So there's no enforcement mechanism in place. There's no way to track progress of the agreement and punish parties who deviate from that track. But I still think, so I think I kind of sound positive about the agreement in the paper, that I think it's still a good idea to engage these three parties in the dialogue, and even if there are no clear outcomes of this, at least, because of this agreement is in the media, it will help some issues. Some issues could get resolved on the side, even if not explicitly as part of this agreement.
Yeah.
It's also an issue of political agenda as well.
Your name and affiliation.
Oh, I'm sorry. Christophe Bonneau, I'm from the French embassy here. I belong to the Ministry of Finance, and I was in posting career for 5 years, just until July. It's also a matter of political agenda, because at the time, in April, the President Park lost her majority. She wanted to push through the agenda of the labor reform, and it didn't work. And now I think she's busy with some other scandals that are definitely going to keep her busy until the end of her mandate, until next year. And this is always the case. There was enough publicity for this agreement at the time. I remember in 2015, labor reform was the number one policy priority for everyone. It was at the G20, what's that framework, growth strategy programs everywhere. It was number one, highlighted. Choi Kyung-wan, the minister at the time for finance, said regular employees are overprotected. I mean, the things that you mentioned, I think they are aware of all of this. It's just a matter of how you push it through. And clearly, there was no possibility to remove some of the protection of the regular workers at the time. And then the ideas were that then you would try and protect more the non-regular workers, and there are actually two ways to do it, either through through law, and then you would force them, and that's what they tried in 2013 when they put a cap to the number of non-regular contracts, but that actually forced them to get fired instead of move on to the permanent job. So this is how, again, you move up the ladder from non-regular to regular. The other being to protect them by government funding, and again that relates to the issue of Korea having a very social spending to GDP that's about 10%, lowest in the OECD, I believe, and that no one and that the President Park said that she would not. Increase this amount until the end of her mandate, or until until the next 30 years. So this is all, I believe. You see that policies are not working. It's interesting to take stock of this time window where it was number one priority and obviously it didn't work, and to see that why did it not work. And I believe it's related much more to cultural aspects and changes in the Korean development model, in social model as well. This very low social spending is one of those ideas. Another one is that you mentioned the dualism between startup and SMEs and Chaebol. One of the reasons is that there is this, this history of Korean development model of being, with big conglomerates, export-led, male-dominated, manufacturing-dominated, labor-intensive, cheap labor to attract foreign investment. Things are changing right now, but the model is not changing. And people, when you look at the OECD figures, the entrepreneur vision of society is extremely negative. It's the most negative in all OECD countries, which means that people have a very negative view of entrepreneurship, having your own company as the possible future for your own future as a youngster. And companies that benefit from Korea's government funding are usually SMEs that are very old, like on average I think it's 15 years, although it's a startup fund, which doesn't make much sense. Even the creative economy policy that were set up by President Park, she was elected as an SME president, the president of the SMEs at the time, with this idea of rebalancing growth. And what came up with the creative economy was that she came up with these innovative centers. I don't know if you've heard of that, but they are all dominated by Chaebol. Each center is dominated by one Chaebol, and you get back to the idea that the Koreans who would set up their own companies would just wait until they get absorbed or hired by one of these conglomerates. You get always to the same idea. Vocational training versus regular having exams, tests, certificates is the same. It's all in the culture, in the education. As long as the parents want their children to go to like Sky universities from the very young age. I've heard little girls of 4 years old saying that they want to go to Yonsei when they're older. This is all something that is very deep in their cultural roots, and that even if the mismatch is there, they don't really. I mean, it takes so long to actually realize that it doesn't help. And that's a problem for all companies. The cost of retraining their own people is an extremely big problem, especially for foreign-owned companies. And I was representing the French companies at the time. They were saying it's very costly. We used to rely on Korea as a cheap labor provider. This is no longer the case. You have many other countries that have cheaper labor. So that what do you get? You get then highly skilled. Well, they're number one in PISA scores. This is great, but their skills don't match what is needed. There is a cost to retrain and everything. There's the gender inequality issue. Yes, you can spend more, but you still have this family model things. And I think I should stop here because I would never. But I believe this is much more culturally rooted than an issue of policy making. Thanks.
George.
Yeah, well, very interesting and nice talk. Nice talk. The real quick comment, very non-academic comment, but I have to bring this up because I actually watched all 20 episodes. If you like Korean dramas, there is a drama called Misang that kind of talks a little bit about some of these issues on a social level. Very, very entertaining. But I kept envisioning some of the scenes from that, and I thought it was is interesting. You're probably aware of that, but anyway, non-academic remark. But the question is, there's quite a bit of foreign workers now. I think the foreign worker number is going to hit 1 million moving into the next cycle, moving into the next fiscal cycle. What does that do to the discussion that you just gave? Does that distort things even further or make it even harder for the non-regular worker?
So are you talking about workers from Southeast Asia, or are you talking about...
Well, it used to be you, to an extent.
Korean, Chinese, Vietnamese, Mongolians, Kyrgyzstan. I mean, there's a whole foreign sector right now.
That's a different topic that I didn't include at all. But right now I think they would fall into the non-regular worker status. There are many reports of abuse of these workers. I think it doesn't change the story that I gave. Maybe it just there's another, I guess, a dimension in the labor market that could be discussed. I don't know.
Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. That was really comprehensive and informative. My name is Michelle Han. I'm a researcher at Center for Strategic and International Studies. So my question is rather narrow. So I got the idea that for SMEs, if you're a regular worker, or if you're like if you have a regular employment at SMEs, I guess your labor rights is rather weak. It's hard to get enforced by the government. And I was wondering whether how the situation for labor unions, if you are working at like big companies, I guess so-called Chaebols. So I think that like recently Hyundai Motors and some other Korean SOEs, like the workers, were on strike, and so basically my question is, if you in Chaebols, what are the situation if you are in labor unions? Like, what's the deal with the government?
Like you mentioned, so this recommendation of narrowing the gap between regular working conditions and non-regular working conditions would be difficult because of in the large corporations, unions are reluctant to lower the working conditions. The government is trying to engage with the unions, partly in this tripartite agreement. But it's unclear whether there is space for negotiation between the unions and the government.
Thank you. David Tully from the State Department. Acknowledging the problems in Korea's labor market, could you maybe, I guess, briefly put it in a comparative perspective? Like, how do the problems in this labor market compare to other OECD labor markets, and what should we be most concerned about, or what should we be, how should we be thinking about this versus other viable alternatives, right?
Okay, I haven't explicitly thought of that, so I might be just speculating that. And I'm running a little bit into my jet lag here, but so I think I'm thinking of the ideal. What would be the ideal structure of a labor market where there are no structural breaks between types of firms, types of labor contracts, and I'm not sure if I haven't worked with other countries on what are the conditions for large versus small, and so I'm only thinking of the kind of the ideal of a labor market where where there are no clear gaps between types of firms, types of workers, and both firms and workers can move efficiently and find the best use for themselves.
Yes.
So I'm Jenna Gibson. I'm here at KEI, and just quickly, because I think we're running against the end here, but I'm really interested. A lot of your recommendations sound really great, but I see kind of a chicken and an egg problem here in that when you're talking about the education system from pre-K is basically designed to get you to a Chaebol. And then the Chaebol has their standards that kind of shape the kind of education that you get, and then it kind of goes around and around. So a lot of the recommendations are good, and there needs to be some sort of way to insert yourself into or insert a change into this cyclical problem. So where is that break? I mean, do you start with young children and try to interrupt this cycle, or do you start with the hiring process, or where do you think is the best place to focus the effort?
So one is the social norms, kind of educating families and companies to get everybody to accept the ideal of well-balanced life between work and personal life, and so something should be done at the family level so that children don't spend 14 hours a day studying between the formal education and after-school tutoring, and then doing extensive homework every day. Right? I mean, it's connected to other problems, like Korean children have horrible eyesight because they don't go out, and so some kind of family education of families, and then education in the workplace. I think. So many of these issues are cultural, that workers behave in some way that they expect, they think is expected of them. All workers arrive at the workplace before their supervisor gets there and leave only after the supervisor leaves. Actually, the supervisors don't care or may not care. At many businesses, they don't care, but it's the social norm that's expected of workers, so that's what workers do. Employers also have some maybe cultural ideals, that they have this ideal of a breadwinner, or maybe like a stratified breadwinner model of which workers they should be promoting. If they have to choose between a young person and somebody who has 2-3 children, they will promote the person with 2-3 children to help the family of that worker. Seniority-based promotion system is another issue. Again, that's a cultural issue, that people get promoted by according to their tenure with the employer rather than according to their actual contribution to the firms. So I don't know, even at my university, there is no way for me to get promoted by being successful. Going from assistant professor, associate to full professor takes 12 years. There's no way to shorten that. What does tenure actually mean? Nothing. It's a regular employment position. So I had job security the moment I got hired 10 years ago, And actually, the tenure system is not so meaningful in Korea. So yeah, there are these maybe cultural, part of it is cultural issues that education, the government could help market participants to negotiate with each other effectively. Right now, there are no employment contracts in Korea. When I got hired 10 years ago, there was one sheet of paper, no discussion. I just saw what my salary would be, but no information about my future promotion system, my rights, my responsibilities. Everything is implicit. So one thing that could be improved is put working conditions on paper, make them explicit, allow for better negotiation. Right now, workers cannot negotiate. Disadvantaged workers cannot come to an employer and say, hire me for half the wage, or let me prove myself in the first 2-3 months. There's no system like that, which exists in other countries. So that's there's a vocational training. So just if the government can find money for vocational training, childcare programs, those would be useful.
Okay, real quick.
Very quickly. It's interesting what you're saying, that the whole society has been designed to help children go to Chaebol, thinking that Chaebol only account for about 10% of employment in Korea. That means like almost 90% of employment is not provided by Korea. And I think in people's mind, even in foreigners' mind, people think of Samsung. There are figures that are like 75% of Korea GDP is like Chaebol. This is all wrong if you look at the figures in detail, and I think it's an exaggerated view of Chaebol contribution to the economy and to employment in general. And there was the last thing about this seniority issue. There was something that was actually tackled by the policy through the so-called wage peak system. I don't know if you followed on that. And they were supposed to again try and remove a bit of the salary of the eldest to help recruit the youngest. But again, this is all about very loose incentives, and without actual enforcement, it doesn't go anywhere.
Right. There's also like work sharing programs like there are in other countries, in France, but I'm not sure how effective they are. So there are some. So the government can make recommendations to companies, but it's unclear whether the employers and workers and families will respond and change their attitudes.
Well, this is going to remain an important issue for South Korea, both in terms of better utilizing its labor force and ensuring better economic growth going forward. But if you'll join me in thanking Dr. Hlasny for an excellent presentation discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much.